So Food Matters is a charity working on food systems transformation, and 2024 is our 20th anniversary, something we're choosing to celebrate rather than thinking about why do we still need to be here. And some of that work is about looking back on the work that we've done, the collaborations and the new ventures and partnerships, including this series of webinars. And our work over this 20 years has been about creating opportunities for change for a better food future through participatory approaches and community engagement, with people and community at the heart of everything we do. And our work covers a wide range of food-related issues and topics, not just prison food, but the impact of poor diet on health and well-being has been a consistent theme, particularly within the criminal justice system, which has been central strand since 2012. In 2012, we ran 2 pilots at HMP Send and Highdown, and from then we've kind of built on that programme. And I think after COVID, we wanted to take stock and consider what we've done and the state of food in the criminal justice system. And in January this year, after lengthy research, many conversations and 2 roundtables, we published a briefing paper called Food Matters in Prisons. And the central theme of that paper was about the role of food in prisons and the impact it has on those in the prisons. And the report explores the crucial role of food in shaping prisoners' identity, relationships, and its potential to have positive impacts in prisons. And it includes things like fostering relationships, promoting education, exercise, and meaningful activities, enhancing cultural understanding, improving physical and mental well-being, enhancing safety, and reducing offending. And this webinar is the first in a series exploring in more detail some of these key topics and issues that we've outlined in this report. And so the aim of the webinar is to raise awareness of the potential role that food has in a rehabilitative culture, and to widen the conversation away from food being just a functional aspect of prisons to become a focal point for a range of activities and improvements to prison regimes and outcomes for those in custody. So today we're asking, what is a rehabilitative culture within prisons? How does food fit into this model? And how do we make the changes we need to our prison food system? And to shed light on these and other questions, I'm delighted to welcome our speakers and thank them for their time and expertise in this area. And we hope that this will be a really informative session today. So each speaker is going to speak for about 15 minutes. And as I say, I'm going to ask you to save your questions till all of the speakers have finished. And we're asking you if you can put your questions in the chat. And if your question is for a specific speaker, if you could indicate that as well, that would be great. My colleague Ruth, who's on the call, she's going to group some of the questions together, similar questions together, so we can try and get through as many questions as we can. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Sarah Lewis. Sarah works at Penal Reform Solutions and describes herself as a prison reformer. Her current work, amongst various other things, is work in English prisons and is contributing to developing and improving prison environments to achieve greater safety and well-being. And Sarah's going to give us an overview of a rehabilitative culture and why we need to work towards this approach. So Sarah, please do give us your expertise.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen and hope you can all see it. Let's just get it up. Okay, can everyone see that okay? Get a nod from, lovely, thanks Ruth. Okay, I'm really pleased to be here, really excited to be here. I absolutely love food. I absolutely love working in prisons. So it's really just brilliant for me to have the opportunity to be here to talk to you. As we talked about, I'm the director of Penal Reform Solutions, but also work in an organisation called Grow, Transform, Belong. So we very much focus on how we can bring about a kind of really positive, growth-focused environment, both in the community as well as in prisons. And have worked pretty much in the criminal justice system for about 20 years now. So I'm going to just talk to you a little bit about who we are, a little bit about rehab culture, how that links to food, and then talk to you a little bit about some of how we've used food to support cultural change within prisons. So just to tell you a little bit about ourselves, this is us. We're a really small, passionate team, come from a completely different group, different backgrounds, really diverse. In the sense of we've got people who have worked in probation, prisons, people who've been in prison, and people who've worked in academia. but all very passionate about prison reform and about transforming culture, not only in prisons, but also in the community, in order to really bridge that gap between prisons and the community. We also have a lot of passionate people internationally that work with us. So we work in Asia, we work in the Middle East, as well as Europe at the moment, really looking at how we can connect people up that are passionate through our kind of Growth Alliance, and how we can make a collective impact, which is what we're all about, really. So let's firstly think about what is rehab culture. I think for me, there's something about rehab culture being a place that is safe and decent. It's a place that is really supportive, but also a place that's really hopeful. And in some senses, we've moved away from the term rehabilitative culture, mainly because for us, there's more people in prison than just the people that live there. We also have staff there. We also have families that visit, visitors, partners. We have a lot of people that, I guess, occupy that prison space. And so if we can create an environment that is growth focused, if it's strengths based, if it's imaginative, if it's hopeful in its nature, then with that we can inspire and we can grow anyone who kind of steps foot into that place. But the plan ultimately is, if we can create a culture that is more focused on personal growth and development, then with that we can build positive identities, not only for individuals that live there, but also for our hardworking prison officers and our organisations and our system, I guess, more broadly in terms of our criminal justice system. And I didn't really see a rehabilitative culture. Having worked, my first job, I worked in a prison in England, which was a really busy local prison that was really, really challenging. The first time I really experienced a rehabilitative culture was in Norway. So I spent 3 years researching and working alongside the staff and the people in prison over there, and looking at how they use food, how they grew food, how they shared food as a way in which that kind of supported their personal development. So these are just some of the images from Bastoy prison. You may know it from I guess, some documentaries. There's quite a lot around this particular prison. Never had any violence, or very, very low levels of violence, I think, maybe more recently, but ultimately relatively very safe place, very productive place. And in terms of rehabilitation, it has the lowest rates of reconviction. So 16%, I think, was the most recent statistic around it. Sorry, my slides are paying up. Really nurturing environment, and the way, like I said, the way in which they use food in the land. They grew their own food. They had chickens. They had animals. They had a farm. They had a forest. It was very much this case of creating sustainable answer, but also how we can use the environment and how we can use food as a way to bring about positive change and help people make sense of themselves and their own culture and the organizational culture, I guess. And from that, we boiled down, I guess, what made 3 Norwegian prisons that were seen as exceptional, what made them particularly effective in promoting a rehabilitative culture, or growth culture, I guess we would call it now. And so linking this to food, I guess, for the purpose of this webinar, I think there's something about how food can bring us joy, how it can lead us to escape somewhere peaceful, I guess, as we reconnect to memories that are associated with food. How food can give us freedom by giving us choice, so choices around food, how it can create a kind of homely-like experience, so how we can taste normality, I guess, sometimes through food, how it can promote well-being nutritionally, but also how it can encourage us to deliver meaningful work and meaningful relationships, so how we can connect with people through food in order to kind of create that safe environment, and how it can be a tool and a mechanism by which we can not only be healthy, but learn how to use food in a way to have that level of health in a more sustainable fashion, and also how it can help us connect with nature or connect with the earth around us and the world around us. From looking at the work that we've done, I guess the reason why we need rehabilitative culture is that it ultimately builds stronger relationships, it builds greater faith in staff, in leaders, in managers, it reduces harm and violence. It also creates a healthy place that ultimately could lead to a healthy community, and creates opportunities for personal growth. It's also been seen to increase staff morale, lower staff sickness, increase staff retention. But for me, there's something about this real, this kind of principle of normality, which Norway talk about a lot, which is ultimately, if we can mirror a healthy community in a prison, then with that, people are ready for it. People have the responsibility, they have this dress rehearsal, they build the resources they need in order to be active citizens, active neighbours. And I guess the reasons why we do it, that you know, they're my two children there. Who do we want our children to meet on the street, is the big question. And I think for me, I want to create an environment in prison so when people leave it, they are really equipped to cope in the community. And that includes life skills like cooking, that includes life skills around what's, you know, nutritionally important for them, how that impacts on their mental and their physical well-being. So in terms of our culture work, just a little bit, I guess, to showcase some of the stuff. So we've done a lot of wellbeing days, and when we talk about wellbeing, invariably we co-produce those kind of days, those activities with the staff and with the people in prison, and look at what are the kind of things that are important. And food is always something that comes up, because ultimately food kind of connects people. So whether that is around experiencing different foods like flavour and how that links to maybe diversity, acceptance and tolerance in our communities, whether that's about trying new things, about maybe how we can kind of create more effective and new relationships through food and through tasting food, but also how food connects people in terms of building teams. So our team cooked together, they shared food together. I baked with our team in this particular prison. And how we can kind of make it more meaningful, I guess. So little things like finding out what people's, you know, what cakes they ate when they were growing up, or what foods they ate when they were happy, and therefore, you know, creating those, sharing those, talking about how we can reconnect with past habits and past identities to bring about, I guess, a more hopeful future for people that are in prison. I think there's also something about symbolically what it conveys. So how we can use food to really communicate culture and transcend language. So a lot of people maybe not being able to speak English well in prisons, a lot of people coming from different countries, coming from different backgrounds. Food is just such a beautiful way in which we can educate and learn about you know, the importance of food. For example, on the left here, this was our Travellers Awareness afternoon, where they made kind of I think it was rabbit stew. We had on the right here, they were talking about how they made these kind of really special pancakes that were culturally significant to them. So I think there's something there about preparing something that represents you and something that you connect with, but also how you can share that with other people in order for them to understand you and for them to connect with you. I think the other thing is, which is a quote here, is about the significance of food, and sometimes the smallest things in the community that we kind of take for granted, when you place it into a prison environment where the depravity around food is quite significant, they become really, really important, like disproportionately important. And so it's used as a currency. It's used as a way to connect with people. You know, if you borrow, if you have a tea bag, you have to give that back double bubbles. So you have to give that back in twice the amount. So it's a way in which people negotiate. It's a way in which there's currency of some kind. And I guess in its worst forms, we've recently done some stuff around gambling culture. You know, people have a bet, they have a deal, and then with that they are giving food in exchange of that if they've lost that bet. In the event that people haven't given that food back, we've seen violence, we've seen physical, sexual violence within prisons. And so I just remember a really poignant quote from one of our people in prison that talked about it was over a slice of chocolate cake, and with that this guy got stabbed as a result of this kind of debt that he owed. And this real significance of, like, it would seem completely abnormal out in our communities that food would have so much significance. And yet food for me is so significant in prisons because of the deprivation of liberty and the deprivation of that kind of freedoms that people have, that food is something that people are really focused on. And so therefore we need to, if we can get it right and we can create more opportunities where food can be used as a vehicle to not only nurture people's bodies but psychologically nurture them, I think that is something that's really, really important. I think there's also something about food can help us feel like home. So I remember a gentleman cooking me a mackerel curry and asking me to taste it and talking about stories around his childhood. you know, in terms of this curry and what it kind of reminded him of. So there's that real importance around this principle of normality. There's also something about preparing food that's relatively normal and something that people like doing as a ritual, because it gives them that ownership and that ability to be creative. But we also can use food in prisons to, sorry about my slides, to dehumanize and to objectify and to kind of commodify people, in the sense of, you know, lunch being referred to as feeding time, for example, or you know, food being packed out with particular food. Sweet corn comes to mind a lot. So if some people saying there's sweet corn in all the food, as a way to kind of nutritionally inject food without really thinking about what that looks like and what that feels like to the people that are eating it. So in some ways food can enrich us, but I think also foods can also kind of contribute to maybe feelings of being objectified or being in this kind of warehouse environment, which I guess can happen throughout institutions, essentially. I think there's also something about, in criminology, we talk about docile bodies. So this idea that we want to try and calm people down so that they comply with us and they do what we want. And I think, you know, food can be used as a vehicle to do that. If you pack a load of carbohydrates into an individual, they're going to feel, you know, less energy in that kind of way. And so how foods can be used to create kind of docile people, in the same way that we can sometimes see with medication in prisons internationally, as well as in England and Wales. It's a way in which we can manage our population, I guess, which is you know, interesting in some ways, but worrying in many ways. And then I guess there's something about how food can lift us and how it can really inspire us, and it can kind of bring us that kind of space. And I think the beauty of that is that when our mood is stabilized and when our mind is maybe more clearer as a result of feeling nutritionally kind of, I guess, full up, I think there's something about that gives us the space and the clarity to actually think about the important things. For example, who am I? Who do I want to be? What impact have I, you know, made on the world? What impact do I want to make on the world? Food has got a real powerful kind of transformative opportunity that could really bring about kind of creativity. Just this picture here was made by one of the guys in prison. It was made from stale bread, and this real, you know, he talked about, you know, even things that you throw away, you can kind of make them beautiful. And he was like, that's a bit like me, isn't it, miss? And I kind of thought, you know, there's just something just incredibly creative about when we haven't got a lot of things around us, how people can still create quite beautiful things. And I guess the opportunity that food can bring to possibly motivate change and bring people together, I think, is really important. So food is just one part of our culture work. We do a lot around relationships and music and connection and belonging, and food is just one way in which we can really work, I guess, some of this kind of growth work into our prisons here. And we found from growth work that it can increase retention. So we found that in our pilot site. In our recent site, we've just found that, you know, 18 months, we saw a 60% reduction in violence, greater faith in our leaders, better attitudes towards people in prison, and this real indicator of a rehab culture, which is around energy and hope and community and connection. And so therefore food plays such a central role within that, in my view. And then just very quickly to share with you, I guess, one more thing that we kind of do maybe outside of prison, but certainly for people that are prison leavers, that as they come out of prison, we kind of get asking them to put in their location, and with that, giving them the tools to create a kind of growth map to support them in their journey to peace and happiness, and you know, really being part of our communities and belonging to our communities. Part of that is about well-being, and part of that is about relationships and coping. And with that, we give people the opportunity to, you know, access some really short YouTube videos around how do you cook with a budget, how do you cook nutritionally, how could you cook for your children, being creative when you haven't got a lot of money, really connecting with food charities or food banks, or you know, services that can really help, I guess, not only with food but also with relationships and coping and employment and learning. But for me, there's something about food that is just really powerful, I think, and that's maybe because I grew up with just beautiful food from my mum, and I've got loads of lovely memories about food. So my relationship with food is great. But I think it can tell us so much about other broader relationships that can really help us move away from crime. And I think, you know, our growth app, hopefully, which is co-produced with people that are in prison and leaving prison, can hopefully bring about just getting all of the information that maybe people need in one place to really help them navigate spaces that are, you know, maybe quite confusing. So having, you know, third sector organisations, charities, as well as all of these organisations are important. So my concluding thought, I guess this is just a recent paper, which I just thought was just really poetic, I guess, in terms of summarising what I would want to say about prisons and I guess prison policy. But I guess for me, like I think we've already said in this short space of time, food is an opportunity. It's an opportunity where people can share, opportunity where people can give, which is really rare in prison, that you have an opportunity to serve and give and you know, have a dress rehearsal of that, but how it can really reflect family, cultural identities, and how it can have the potential to really transform relationships, build confidence, build life skills, all of the things that we really need for reintegration ultimately. And so I guess that leads me to my last kind of slide, which is really just about our campaign at the moment about Justice 2.0 is all about how do we really utilise, for example, the knowledge around food in prisons to really inform the future. Because for me, justice needs an upgrade. For me, there's lots of things that are harmful, traumatic, difficult, and ineffective. And I think we can serve communities better. But Justice 1.0 ultimately, I believe, needs that upgrade. And I feel food is central to that because it enables us to demonstrate compassion, to try something new, to build relationships, and ultimately to reduce, I guess, some of the harms that we are experiencing in our prisons that are systemic at this stage and at this moment in time. So if you want to get involved, please scan our QR code, and that is me over. I'm really sorry about my slides. They had a will of their own.
Yeah,
but
well,
I hope you got the message okay.
Thanks, Sarah. Yes, my slides did the same, but we are going to send out the slides to people, so not to worry. You work through it. Thank you so much. I mean, I think that gave us a really good kind of grounding of what we're thinking about in terms of, you know, covering off the issues around strong relationships and the normalization agenda. So I think that was really helpful for setting the scene. We're going to move on to Helen Sandwell. Helen is a nutritionist and leads the Food Matters prison food program. She's the editor of our food and health publications and has a regular nutrition and cooking column in Inside Times newspaper. And Helen's going to talk about Food Matters' whole systems approach to food in prison and how this contributes to a rehabilitative culture. Thank you, Helen.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about some of the work that we've been doing at Food Matters over the years and just say a bit about how we think it might fit in with the rehabilitative culture and with rehabilitation in general. So what I'm going to cover is 3 pieces of work that we've been involved with. The first was at HMP Wandsworth, and that's where we developed a whole prison approach to food in prisons. And then I'm going to talk about two projects that we ran in response to COVID, because we were meant to be taking part in a project in a prison, which we were unable to do because of COVID. So we had to develop a plan B with our funding. So these are 2 things that we decided to do. And then I'm just going to reflect as I talk and at the end about how these projects, how they fit in with a rehabilitative and normalizing culture. Okay, so just for people who don't have a background in criminal justice, and I know there are people here today who don't, I just wanted to say a bit about the prison population. So many people, maybe the majority of people in prisons, have a background of childhood abuse neglect resulting in trauma. And that, as a result, can impact on their mental and their physical health. So the Bromley briefings, which are produced every year by the Prison Reform Trust, in there it says that 59% of men and 82% of women in prison report mental health problems. So mental health is a huge issue in prisons, but also physical health. And the World Health Organization have reported that in people over 50, cardiovascular disease is over 3 times higher in prisons than in the community at large. And similarly, respiratory conditions, that's non-communicable ones, it's not things like viruses, are 3 to 6 times higher. So when we started working prisons, we knew that mental and physical health were both major issues, and we wanted to use food to help support people to look after their own physical and mental health. Okay. So when we went into Wandsworth, we developed a whole prisons approach to food. And this is just a diagram of what we wanted to do there. We'd run courses before in prisons, and they'd always gone down really well, but people had always said to us, look, you know, it's all very well you saying to us, this is how you eat more healthily, do this, do that. But if the food here isn't healthy, and if we can't access healthy food, then it's all a waste of time, really. So we knew that there was more to people eating healthily in prison than just teaching people what food was healthy. So when we developed our model for the whole prison approach, we looked at the whole prison, how we could make changes. So not just running courses for people in prison, not just promoting healthy eating through other means, but also working with the staff in the prison. So we looked at working with the kitchen staff, people who run the canteens. For people who don't work in prisons, a canteen is basically, it's the prison shop. So it's where people can buy food and other items like soap, toiletries, all sorts of items. And also working with residency, because the people who are in charge of residency, they're the ones that would see perhaps there are spaces where people might be able to eat together, perhaps there are spaces where people might be able to do cooking. And we felt that if we did this, then we could actually influence the way people act in a much more efficient way than just with healthy eating courses and health promotion. And our argument was that by influencing the way people ate, if they could eat more healthily, this can impact on their mental and physical health, and that could contribute to rehabilitation. So in Wandsworth, we did all sorts of things within the space of a year and a half, and it was just Victoria and myself doing it. But we had lots of threads to the project, but everything was done using the Food Matters participatory approach. And we believe that that's key to our success of working in all sorts of environments. And we believe that people are more likely to adopt positive change if they're involved in deciding what that change should be. So before we started anything within Wandsworth, we talked to everyone who was involved. So that's people serving sentences and prison staff throughout the prison. We ran courses, we ran a recipe competition, we did kitchen consultancy and consultancy around the canteen. We trained 14 peer supporters, and we, as Sarah mentioned, within the culture, staff should be involved as well. So we ran healthy eating workshops for new staff trainee who were coming into the prison. We also did some work around the staff restaurant because we wanted a healthy food environment for staff as well as for people serving sentences. And we did lots and lots of health promotion, including interviews on Radio 10 that they've got there. We were at staff and staff promotion days for people in prison. And we also developed a leaflet that went to everyone within the prison. But I'm just going to reflect on a couple of things within that project. We could only have one part of the project evaluated externally. So we decided that we would look at the healthy eating courses, and that the evaluation was done by Surrey University. And we were really pleased with the results. So Surrey looked at food diaries and knowledge and attitude questionnaires that were given to people before and after the course. And through that, we saw that the course participation demonstrated that there was actually a statistically significant increase in knowledge around healthy eating, and likewise a statistically significant increase in fruit and veg consumption. That was really important to us because we showed that participating in a course could help people to eat more healthily. But what was equally important was the feedback from people who were on that course. So this is the sort of feedback that we got. And I think this is the evidence that it's contributing towards a rehabilitative culture. So this guy said, having a healthier diet helps me to improve my self-esteem because I'm more caring of my body. It helps me to deal with depression and other negative emotions. I feel better with myself. Therefore, it increases my confidence and I look better. I have more energy, particularly during daytime, so I'm more active, and consequently I sleep better. And that's everything that we wanted out of those courses. So just going on to look at our recipe competition, we had loads of entries, and this is a list of the main meals that people entered into the competition. And we asked people to, if they could, say where the meal came from, where it originated. So you can see that, and you can see the vast range of different foods coming from all over the world. And for us, this demonstrated two things. Firstly, it showed how much people wanted to cook for themselves. And these were meals that we asked for, meals that could be prepared in the cell, and also meals that they'd like to see cooked in the main kitchen. And what we found out was, although we weren't encouraging people to use kettle cooking, the meals that came back to us were all meals that were cooked in kettles. So we knew that people really wanted to cook, and also it just showed how food reflected people's identity. Because of the wide range, so from Caribbean food to mince and tatties in Scotland, we knew how important food was for people's identity. So going on to another project that took place during COVID, as I said, we were supposed to be going into work in a prison, and that was HMP Send. But just the month we were supposed to go in, lockdown occurred all over the UK, so that wasn't possible. And it went on for a long time within prison, so we just couldn't get access into Send. So we were asked to produce a Plan B, which we did, and this was a magazine, a health and wellbeing magazine called Her Wellbeing. And we wanted to help people help themselves really within the confined circumstances of COVID and lockdowns. So we, as well as putting in information about food, we also included information about other forms of well-being. So for example, keeping fit, yoga, mindfulness, all sorts of things that people could do for themselves. And say it's actually now available within prisons in digital format as well as printed format. We've kept Her Wellbeing going ever since then. So this is an example of a front cover of Her Wellbeing. We wanted to make it bright, attractive, something that somebody would want to read if they were in prison or if they were in the community. We just wanted it to be a very attractive magazine. We'd seen some of the things that had go around in prisons, and they just weren't appealing to people. So we wanted to make it something special. So you can see just some front pages of issues here. And we cover all sorts of things: food, a big focus on mental well-being, about how food can help you make connections, and all sorts of special topics about food. And as I said, we've gone on to do a His Wellbeing as well, and that goes out to the men's estate wherever people can access it digitally. So it's going to all the men's prisons. Similarly, we produced an in-cell learning course called the Feel Good Food Club to help people through COVID. And we based it on our face-to-face courses. It comprised 6 modules that people received, and they worked their own way through it in their own time. In the first year, we recruited 500 women, which we were really pleased about. And now we are developing that course into digital formats, so we hope to be able to roll it out in digital format over the next year. A major focus of our course was to help people feel empowered to make their own changes, to bring about changes to their own mental and physical health, but also to help bring about changes within their own prison. So here's the front cover, and you can see how bright and appealing it is again. And I'll just flick through some of the modules. So we start with basic healthy eating, but then go on to specific aspects around, a lot of it around mental health, around how food affects emotions, how emotions affect your eating, especially looking at substance misuse, and looking at food in the context of self-care. So not just the way you eat, but other ways of how you look after yourself. And that picture is from the last module, where we ask people to think about what they're going to do next. And as I said, it's a big emphasis was about how people can help themselves. And we used, here you can see, we said, yes, you can do it. Take back control of your life. And also what they could do with it within the prison to help the prison. So this was one person who told us, okay, I'm nearly finished, who told us about what she was doing within that prison. And here, just to finish, this is how we think we're supporting and contributing to a rehabilitative culture. Well, we think through the work we do, we're certainly supporting people's mental and physical health and encouraging them to care about their own self-care. We're helping people to reimagine their identities by helping them feel they've got more control over themselves and their environment, and boost their self-efficacy. We're encouraging social interaction through the cooking and eating we do together. And we're helping create a normalizing environment. And hopefully, as through the reports that we produce, we're helping get our message through the whole of the prison service and up to head office to help to tell people how food is a power for good. And I'll just finish by giving you some links. You'll get this this PowerPoint presentation. So there are some links here to our report, to our blogs that we're writing as a result of our report, different topics that we're taking out from our report and expanding on them more. And just a link to some Inside Time articles that I write. I write a column every month, and some photos taken from Inside Time, which I think just kind of summarize what we're trying to do, that we want to show how important food can be, how pleasurable it can be, and how it can be part of a normalizing environment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helen. a very a quick gallop through
Yes.
all of the work that we've done over the last 12 years. So thank you. Please do start putting your questions in the chat. I think that was really great, comprehensive cover of what we've been doing. Our next speaker is Yvonne Thomas, and she is the Chief Exec at the Clink charity. Some of you on this webinar may have eaten at some of the Clink restaurants. She has many years of experience working across sectors, including the Ministry of Justice, and now brings that experience to supporting people on their rehabilitation journey through the Clink training programme. And Yvonne is going to talk to us about the Clink's training programmes and some of the wellbeing activities that they run that contribute to the rehabilitative journey. So thank you so much, Yvonne, for joining us. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Victoria. It's a great pleasure to be here. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the Clink charity, we're entering our 15th year of working in prisons now. And during those 15 years, we've put rehabilitation at the heart of everything we do. We aren't a food charity, we're a rehabilitation charity, but we use food as our means of delivering our mission. So we talk about social gastronomy. We teach people in prison how to grow food. We teach them how to cook it. We teach them how to serve it. And through doing that, we then help them into a more normalized and give them some better options for their life when they leave prison. We also try and help their families and help them rebuild their relationships. So it's very much a very integrated way of looking at rehabilitation, but we do everything through the medium of food. So I'm going to talk to you today about some of the ways we achieve that, some of the things that work, some of the things that are challenging for us at the moment as well. And I have heard so much from our two speakers already that I really, really do identify with, and maybe pull some of those themes in. So how do we do what we do? Well, I think the first thing is that we break down barriers. We do that in a number of ways. We're best known for our 3 restaurants in Brixton, Highdown, and Up in Style in Cheshire. And that's a very specific way of breaking down barriers because they are open to the public. They are unique. So when members of the public can book a table at Brixton restaurant, quite often that will be the first time that they've been inside a prison, and it will be the first time that they've knowingly interacted with people in prison. And it's the most extraordinary experience when you observe it, because they're in a restaurant. Brixton's just won an AA training rosette. It's consistently in the top 10 on TripAdvisor. And it's a functioning high-end restaurant. So the first barrier that we break down is actually the understanding that people in prison are people, and they're people just like us. And that makes a massive difference to people's attitudes. It opens the gates, literally. But we also break down barriers because Sarah talked about normality and freedom and meaningful work and meaningful relationships. And when you're either teaching people how to grow things or teaching people how to make things, they're working as part of a team. They have to work with other people. And they're doing something, they're getting their hands into food, they're actually creating something, usually for the first time. That starts to erode the barriers that people have to put up around themselves to protect themselves in prison. It gives them those skills back of learning to interact again and being in a safe place, albeit for a limited period of time. In terms of supporting people in prison, bearing in mind that the average literacy age of someone in prison is roughly equivalent to an 11-year-old in the general population. And we are teaching people quite advanced skills. So an education system that's let them down all their lives, is being very effectively replaced by something that they relate to. It's food. Everyone relates to food on some level. And it's a really technical set of training that we deliver. We're training professional chefs, we're training professional horticulturalists, we're training patissiers. This is precise stuff. And therefore, the amount of learning and engagement that happens to support those individuals in prison is remarkable. Their families, they like to talk about what they're learning and what they're doing. And we had a man who left our bakery in Brixton, and he had achieved an MBQ level 2 in patisserie. And he was so looking forward to his release because he was going to make a birthday cake for his son. It was his birthday the weekend after his release. His son was excited about it, and his son had designed the cake. And this man was proficient enough to be able to make the cake to the boy's design. He was a passionate Arsenal supporter, so he wanted a football pitch cake. And his dad sent us a photograph of the cake that he made, and it was absolutely beautiful. So all of a sudden, there's an engagement. They can offer something to their families. More directly, we also run what are called lifer lunches. We've done this in Highdown, and we've done it in Brixton. And this is where anyone who's serving a long sentence can book onto, usually once or twice a year, a proper sit-down engagement meal with their family. And they pay a contribution towards it, so they are buying their family lunch or afternoon tea. And this is often the first time that they've sat down with their friends, their family, in years, if at all. And that's a remarkable engagement to be part of. It's a remarkable engagement to witness. The feedback from those lunches, from both the families and the individuals, is incredibly positive. It's a normalizing experience. It's a rebuilding of relationships experience. We operate, at the moment, we've been in about 38, 40 prisons over the last couple of years. We're now in 33. We've had to come out of some prisons because of funding cuts or because the population is so changeable at the moment that it wasn't possible for us to deliver our model in certain establishments. So we are trying to deal with what we know is the right way to do things, but we're trying to deal with it in a context against which we have no control. We work really closely with the establishments that we engage with. And, you know, it's really tough in there at the moment. The prison population pressures mean that students aren't always available to come to their training. It can mean that students disappear overnight because they've been moved to another establishment at short notice. And we're now seeing the phenomenon that students are unable to finish their qualifications because of the new early release schemes. So we've had to respond by doing shorter qualifications, by being far more agile, but it is very challenging at the moment. So we're clearly a charity. About 10% of our funding comes from the prison service. 90% of it comes from grant funders, foundation funders, and what we generate ourselves. We run the restaurants till we get income from them, although they are loss-making because they're training facilities. But we also have our Clink events business that runs out of Downview Prison in Surrey. And the 14 women in training there, under the supervision of our chef trainers, week before last, cooked a lunch for 1,000 at the Guildhall. Following day, they delivered a dinner for 600 at the Design Museum. And they operate a release on temporary license scheme. So that's hugely empowering for them to be able to earn money that's saved for their release, and also to be able to re-enter the world in a meaningful working way. The reintegration service that we offer is full support and mentoring with no time limits pre and post release. It's charitably funded. We're finding about 1 in 4 of our students are being released without anywhere to live, which means getting a job is quite challenging. So we have to deal with that as well. But what we're doing is we're helping people with that meaningful work. We're helping people create those conditions for meaningful relationships. And most of our students embrace those opportunities with both hands. So, as I've said, we do vocational training. We do a lot of well-being work. We develop kettle recipes that are slightly more nutritious than the usual kettle recipes because we know it's part of prison life. And there's a program that we run at Send Prison, which I know Food Matters has also been engaged at that establishment. For those of you who aren't familiar with Send, it's a women's prison in Surrey. And a lot of women in Send Prison are serving very long sentences. So there's a great deal of mental health challenges. There's a great deal of trauma among the women that we deal with. We have about 18 or 19 women at any one time training as horticulturalists. But about a year ago, we were asked if we would look at a program called Plot to Plate. And this was for women who simply would not engage with the regime. They were isolating, rarely came out of their cells, wouldn't engage in education, work, or training of any sort. We work with them very intensively on a 1 to 2 or 1 to 3 basis, alongside our horticultural programs. And our gardener trainer and our support worker in Send work together with these women. The results have been absolutely extraordinary. So women who would not engage in anything, who would not leave their cells, of 5 women who've been through the intense program so far, 3 of them are now engaged on the mainstream horticulture qualification, and 1 of them is just working in the garden. She doesn't want to engage in a qualification, but she's working in the garden alongside other women. So we know that the physical engagement in meaningful, lovely food growing, food making, baking, it changes people. It gives them something that they can actually engage with. It gives them meaning. And it's a metaphor for all sorts of other things that they can do. We also do general education around things like principles of nutrition and post-release support. So our support workers will often be talking to people about how to budget, how to manage the debt that many of them leave prison with. How can they cook on a budget? What's nutritionally sound but eat to eat? And then at any one time, we've also got a whole bunch of brilliant employers, about 80 of them, and we support them into offering jobs to our graduates. Our graduates are a remarkable group of people. We hold graduate reunions every year so that we can keep engaged with people, and they bring their families. They love being part of the Clink experience, which is very gratifying, very rewarding for all of us. So I think this thing about opening the gate to the public, guests in our restaurants having a different view of the world and knowing what a person in prison is like, not this label prisoner. And we always refer to our students when they're in training, and they are graduates when they have left with a qualification. But most of all, they're the people that we teach. So impact, last year we trained 830 people. We delivered 550 qualifications, which was fantastic. And that was across kitchens, where we train people in prison kitchens who are cooking for other people in prison. We trained 165 in our award-winning restaurants, and we trained 20 patissiers in the bakery. The event served 30,000 people in A-list events, and we catered over 200 events in Westminster Abbey, the Cutty Sark, the Design Museum, St Paul's Cathedral, all sorts of wonderful places. We get just over half of our students, when they graduate, go into employment, and of them about 60% stay in the food industry. 40% have left knowing how to cook and knowing how to feed themselves and knowing how to work again as part of a team. So according to the Justice Data Lab, our graduates are 65.6% less likely to offend. So the reoffending bit works. And pro bono economics reckon that for every £1 spent on the clink, it saves the government just under a £5, so we're quite good value. We've placed over 2,700. It'll be knocking 3,000 by the end of this year into full-time work. And yeah, we've averaged about 60% over the last 2 years. But the most important people are always the people that they're our students. And every week we get a letter or a card. And the words that people tend to use are self-belief, confidence. It's not about I learned to cook. It's about, from Patsy, who was up in style, my confidence has grown enormously. I've developed skills I'll have for the rest of my life. That's what people feel after the clink experience. They feel part of something and they feel enriched. And that's what we do at the Clink charity. That's me done. Thank you very much.
Slightly in and out at the minute. The one bit that I think it would have been lovely to hear, the quote, but as I say, we're going to send round the slides so people can read that. I'd like to thank you. It's a pretty remarkable set of results that you have there and the work that you've been doing over the years. So thank you so much. Sorry, just managed to, you just cut out as you were reading that that really important quote there. I think, you know, the things that you touched on were really important in terms of demonstrating, you know, what seem perhaps very small things to some people. You know, the idea that people, for a lot of people, sitting around and eating a meal together is not, you know, nothing special, but for a lot of people, and we can attest to that, you know, having shared a meal around a table is really, really significant. So and I think that, you know, the point that you highlight, that we kind of know what the issues are, but the challenges are, you know, the kind of day-to-day things on the ground. For voluntary sector organisations particularly, delivering activities in prisons, it's a day-to-day kind of pushing treacle uphill. So, you know, I think that the work that the Clink does is amazing. So thank you so much. I'm sure we'll have lots of questions, but I'm going to move on to Himpal Singh Puri, our next speaker. Himpal is an inspection team leader at HM Inspectorate of Prisons and visiting law professor at the Centre for Criminology at University of Oxford. That's quite a mouthful. He has many years of experience. He was formerly a probation officer, prison trainer, editor of the Probation Journal for over 10 years. And earlier this year, his book, What Are Prisons For? Very good question, was published. And Himpal's going to talk to us about his experience at HMIP of food playing a part in the rehabilitative culture in prisons, including the recent HMIP thematic report on improving behaviours in prisons. So thank you so much for being here with us, Himpal, today. Please do take it away.
Thank you. No, it's great to be here. And as a non-food expert, I think you know, I'm a bit worried I'm going to be repeating in a slightly different way what everyone else has already said in a much more articulate way. Particularly, I just loved what I heard from Yvonne about Clinks, you know, which does amazing work. But I think, you know, from my perspective, it's been dawning on me for a number of years now that all too gradually, actually, just how powerful a force food is in driving positive change in individuals and in institutions. And I've just been trying to think about the basics of it. You know, it's a very basic, consistent need. It influences your mood every day to the extent that not being able to have the foods that you recognize and enjoy should, you know, someone said to me recently, perhaps be seen as another one of the key deprivations of imprisonment alongside the other 5. So I'll talk a bit about what I think we might mean by a rehabilitative culture, why it's so hard to achieve in the prison environment, and how a good food strategy could contribute to a more positive rehabilitative prison culture. And I'll pull out a few examples from both from the thematic, but also from routine inspecting to illustrate the points. I haven't, I'm afraid, got a PowerPoint. You may or may not be happy about that. So first, I mean, how do we develop a culture which supports personal development and helps people to change behaviors? Well, most of us, when we work on changing behaviors in our own lives, it's always easier to make those changes when you feel like you've got the personal resources, personal resources like feeling that you have a sense of control over your life. You can concentrate, you've got the ability to concentrate without hundreds of other thoughts impinging on your mind. You've got a feeling of confidence and a sense of resilience. And those are exactly the things, of course, which prisons can leach from you. Prisons are generally quite bad, I think, at supporting the really important positive concept of self, which can help you to move forwards. Often, by the way, for reasons that are beyond the control of staff. Most prisons are characterized by depersonalization, a loss of individuality, particularly if you're in one of the many overcrowded prisons, one of the many prisons without enough staff to talk to you. And if they're unsafe, run down, don't have enough meaningful work or education, they can be actively anti-rehabilitative. So, one of the things that prisoners often describe when I speak to them in establishments is varying between this sense of being hyper alert because of all the threats of the prison environment. They can be physical threats, they can be psychological threats, but varying from that to colossal boredom because there just isn't enough to do. And if you take into account that many prisons also don't have or don't promote a sense of well-being from seeing greenery, going outside enough, you can see how your world can become quite monotone and quite demotivating. So the best prisons may not be able to fully mitigate those types of problems, but they should understand them. And they try to find the individual and try to support the individual. And cooking, I think, is a great way to do that. I've become slightly obsessed by it since the thematic report, which we did on the experiences of Black prisoners, because it was such a big theme coming out from the people we spoke to. So, but food generally, I think it's worth just reflecting that food is complained about endlessly in prisons, as we know, even when it's not that bad. And especially by minority ethnic prisoners or foreign national prisoners. People who are often brought up on different tastes, different textures, different smells, different feel from the food that they're giving, even different ways of eating it. And I don't think we've done enough to properly understand that this general unhappiness isn't really just about recipes or the quality of food. That might well be an issue, of course, but it's only one dimension to this. It's also about the need for personal agency. It's about the need for emotional comfort. Those really important things that food can give you, and which the other speakers have already spoken about. So the thematic review on Black prisoners and on Black staff as well showed that food can reinforce people's understanding of their cultural identity. It can give them pride and enjoyment in it. And it's also a way to share something of themselves with others. But in general, what we found was that prisons don't use the power of cooking and eating together to support mental health, to improve relationships, to reinforce that sense of cultural identity in a particularly effective way. Many just provide a toaster, maybe a microwave if you're lucky. Not a lot is done beyond that to mobilize the rehabilitative power of food. But of course, there are some fabulous exceptions. And so I just wanted to talk briefly about some of the really good work that I've seen in prisons. When it comes to the realism of expanding self-cooking capabilities in prison, we asked governors about this and other staff about this during the thematic review into the experiences of Black prisoners. Some governors said, understandably, that they needed more investment, that they needed more resources. They didn't have the physical space in their establishments to provide self-catering. But I was really surprised by how enthusiastic virtually everyone we spoke to about this was. They thought they could generally make good progress within existing resources, even if it wasn't going to be the perfect world, which we'd like to see. And what you needed to, make that progress was some planning, some will, and some help. So the best recent example I've seen is in a prison called Oakwood. It also featured quite heavily in another thematic review we did on improving behavior in prisons. Oakwood was doing a really good job of incentivizing good behavior by giving people trust and genuine rewards. So often we go into prisons and prisoners say, well, the incentive scheme is all very well, but there isn't much difference between being an enhanced top-level prisoner and being a standard or a basic prisoner. So why bother to behave? Why bother to work towards what the scheme is offering? But in Oakwood, around 45% of prisoners could cook their own food. So the rest of the prisoners, by the way, didn't much like the food the prison was providing for them. But they knew that they could. They had good routes into being able to access a range of really well-equipped kitchens across the establishment, get the rewards of cooking their own food, get all the positive things that we've talked about. And the prison was doing some good work to try to mainstream the use of food to build relationships, which is a key theme in the thematic report on race. They were building engagement in the regime. For example, they had themed events to get more people to the library. They offered brilliant, Yvonne was talking about families cooking. Well, Oakwood was doing this in a fantastic way. They were offering brilliant family cooking visits where prisoners could prepare meals, sit down to eat with their families, with their children, really offer something of themselves. And it was quite striking in our prisoner surveys, the ones we do in every prison we go to, and in our discussions with prisoners, that there wasn't really a lot of difference between the experience of minority ethnic prisoners in Oakwood and the others, which is quite unusual. What they were doing was more effective at improving prison experience than the formal race relation structures that we often see in prisons. And just in case you think Oakwood's got a huge number of obvious advantages, it had one advantage in that it was relatively new. It's only been around for about 12 years, but it has a population of over 2,000. It's got enormous levels of overcrowding. It's got a very substantial high-risk population, so not easy people to manage within the prison. Hundreds of them had connections to organized criminal groups. So lots of very challenging people, lots of difficulties around space, but somehow they're making this work with a will. We've also seen some good work in other prisons. So the improving behavior thematic gives examples of prisoners clubbing together. They were pooling their resources to buy food. They weren't taking prison food, but instead they were buying food from the canteen and sitting down and cooking together. And it felt like a really important feature of a well-functioning community that they could do this. Shortly after the Black prisoner thematic, I went to a prison called Swinfen Hall, and I met a few prisoners there who I thought were, again, getting really involved in the work around food and doing some brilliant stuff. And I met one guy who's working with Food Behind Bars, an excellent charity, which is doing some really great work in a number of prisons. He'd survived on takeaways on the outside. He'd come to really enjoy making his own food in prison. He developed new skills he'd never thought he could possibly develop in the past. It gave him a way to connect to his family, and he was looking forward to cooking for them on release and showing them what he'd learned. And it felt to me that this wasn't just about showing off a skill. It was about someone who, through the act of providing food, was able to convey care and concern for his family, probably in a more powerful way than he could have done through words. I suspect, I didn't know him very well, but I suspect that he used words a lot in the past, and that maybe they were starting to lose their power with his family and with the people he cared about. And maybe he didn't have them to start with. Maybe he's someone who couldn't express himself in other ways, but food provided a really important, powerful way for him to get across his message of care. So in summary, I think prisons have to be open to the possibilities that food presents. It presents possibilities for connection between people, for comfort. It presents opportunities for personal development, social development, and I think prisons should be more ambitious. There is virtually no prison I've been to where I haven't thought they could have done better with food. Even Oakwood was doing great work, but they were thinking about new ways to develop the work and to expand. The other point I want to make is that prisons should take advantage of the skills on offer from the outside. So we've already heard from a range of really, knowledgeable, skilled groups, which can offer something of value to every prison. So often, I think governors are open to the possibilities, but they're not always proactive enough in finding and maybe even funding people to come into the establishment and to provide, a real focus and expertise to contribute to the prison's food journey, and therefore to the prison's ability to provide a rehabilitative culture for people who live there. Very finally, I heard someone say the other day that sharing a meal with someone is sharing your life with them. I think that would be a great motto for prisons that want to develop their cultures through the use of food. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Impel. That's a great expression to end on. I think you're highlighting that there are good things happening in prisons. It often seems to me that it's despite the system, not because of it. And I guess I'd be very interested to hear more about how you think organizations like ours and Food Behind Bars and the clinics can convince governors. What needs to happen to convince governors of that, and how much do you think governors obviously have their own potentially own motivations and agendas of how they think they can change? So where's the sort of rub between that? Because we're very there's a lot of small organizations that are sort of pushing, but what do we need to do to kind of convince governors?
Oh, do you want me to answer that now?
Well, sorry, I was just checking. We should have someone else on the call, but I don't think they've made it. I think Dave Hills from Buckley Hall, the catering manager at Buckley Hall, was going to talk a little bit about what they've been doing with the catering team there at Buckley Hall, but I don't think. Sorry, I'm just looking because I'm not actually on the gallery view at the minute. I'm wondering, does anyone from FoodMat see Dave Hill? Are you on the call? I'm wondering whether we have.
No, he's not
there.
Zoom in, whether he can't access Zoom whilst in prison. So that's a real shame. But if we can get some information from Buckley Hall, we will send that out with the rest of the presentations and the sound recording. But so as we've had all our speakers, I'm just jumping in before other questions are asked. So if you could just even think about that, Himpel, that would be really interesting, because I think the thing is the rest of us are working in the kind of on the outside in voluntary sector and charities, kind of looking on the inside, and it's just something that is always, I guess, a conundrum. How do you convince governors, and where does the sort of, obviously they have pressures coming down from them as well, and it why do some prisons take action on food and others not?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's often to do with a lack of understanding and knowledge, actually. And often I hear that prisons are concentrating on one area rather than another, and usually it's safety. And I think that's a mistaken way to look at the institution, because safety isn't just something which sits alone. If you have people who are competent in use of force, that doesn't mean that that will make it a safe prison. Safety is all about having a purposeful prison where people feel respected and they feel that this slightly elusive sense of rehabilitative culture, which we've been discussing, is being promoted. So I think that message has only just started to properly get through to prison governors. The inspectorate can't make anyone do anything, but I think one of the things we try to do is to encourage institutions to think about the links between all the different areas of the prison. And that's why we look at places in our 4 tests of a healthy prison, which is safety, respect, activity, and preparation for release. All of them are interconnected. And, if you don't pay attention to one area, then other areas will go down. So I think we need to, get people to understand that if they want to have this idea of rehabilitative culture in their institutions, then food is going to be a big part of that. I must admit that up until 2 or 3 years ago, I didn't think it was a big part of how prisons can move forwards. It was only when I spent a lot of time talking to prisoners during the thematic and during other bits of work that message really got home to me. And then, it was reinforced when I went out and saw some charities working in prisons to do food work. So I think it's it's almost like the elephant in the room. It's pretty obvious that this is important, but for some reason, it's not being properly recognised. So this is a fairly woolly answer, to be honest, but part of my solution is that we do more events like this. And
yeah, I agree. Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult when you're completely knee deep in it, like we all are. It seems very obvious, but as you say, for a lot of people, it's not necessarily, and many other things are kind of higher up on priority lists. So I don't want to hog the floor. We've got about 5-6 minutes. I'm wondering, are there many questions, Ruth? Do you want to give us some of them?
Yeah, there's a few. Yeah, I'll run through them. I think there's a question for every speaker, but maybe other speakers can jump in as well if there's something they want to add to that question. So the first question that was asked, and that was directed at Sarah Lewis, was, do you feel that organisations like yours are doing most of the heavy lifting in ensuring that prison populations experience good nutrition? How dedicated are prison governors to improving nutrition within prisons?
That's a really great question. I don't think we're the only ones doing the heavy lifting, or most of it. I think but there are an awful lot of people who are really passionate that are maybe in that kind of minority group that are doing a lot of the heavy lifting. And my concern is the level of burnout and how we can sustain that when things are kind of structurally and systemically very challenging at this stage in terms of, I guess, state of plays in prison. So yeah, I think there are a lot of people that are going over and above because they just incredibly care, and then there's a lot of people that do care but just haven't got much energy left that I think could certainly be nourished and nurtured a little bit more. I think prison governors, I think they are really, I do a lot of supervision with governors across multiple prisons, and I think a lot of them are just very passionate about creating rehabilitative culture. I think in some senses it's again how it's been designed, how things, the pressures that are being placed on them, the level of data that's being demanded of them, again, that kind of real demand that started kind of distracting them away from maybe things that are just incredibly important. So I don't doubt the dedication of our leaders. I think it's more about they're trying their best in the conditions that they're in, and those conditions are just incredibly stressful. I think they would all agree. Someone just brought in, for example, a hot breakfast and seen significant, benefits in terms of violence in his prison. Really admirable. lots of resistance, gone down really, really well. But it takes a lot of energy and it takes a lot of courage. So yeah, the state of play is really, really difficult at the minute. So that's the quick answer.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else want to jump in on that one? Because it just, or should we move on to another question? I think, as you say,
can I quickly come in?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think one of the key points here is that among the 88,000 people we imprison, there are lots of very good chefs.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think that if we want to offer governors a way to make progress in a cost-neutral, cost-effective way, I think we could perhaps encourage them to, you know, tap into all that skill. And it's one of the things which, you know, perhaps you asked earlier on about, you know, how do we get prison governors to understand, you know, the power of food. Maybe, you know, it's by giving them some solutions, you know, and saying that this is one thing they can do and providing some support for them to, you know, tap into the prisoners who can, you know, maybe cook and, you know, improve the food in the prison, but also, you know, do it possibly even more cheaply than it's being done at the moment.
I think,
Can I just add to that? Can I just add to that?
Yes, quickly. I just want to get on to at least one more question. Sorry, go ahead.
So not only are there some very good chefs in prisons, but it's quite interesting that because we work in a lot of prison kitchens regularly, this is about the expectation that is set of the quality of food that's produced in a prison. Because there are kitchens in prisons where most things are cooked from scratch. And there are kitchens in prisons who are operating to the same budgets with the same food chain suppliers, where they're buying everything pre-made. And there's no excuse for it. And you know, we work with some great prisons where the quality of the catering manager, the passion they have for food is evident. And we work in others where it's just not there. And that dictates to a great extent what the experience is for the people in prison, how they relate to food, and whether they're just having carb up because there's nothing else to eat. So I think this is about expectations that are set by the prison service and all of us as to what a catering manager, they should be cooking. They should be delivering cooking, not delivering pre-pack.
Yeah, it's a very interesting, as you say, the variety across the prison estate is very significant, I think. It's 4:29. I'm just wondering if we can manage one quick question with a couple of word answers. Is there anything that's...
I feel like maybe one thing that I think I feel like some of the themes have been touched upon a bit by people, because there was a question for me about funding and funding cuts, but I think that was provisionally touched upon. But one here I think that hasn't been answered is how can we convince the Ministry of Justice or politicians to stop the monopoly of the canteen? Prices are excessive and it's the only place for prisoners to shop if they are fortunate to have cooking facilities. What about prisoners with little or no income? Canteen isn't an option for them. I guess maybe everyone has something to say on this. I guess you all have experience of the canteen within prisons.
I can just say from our point of view, I mean, this is a question that comes up every time we're in a prison and people complain about the cost of the canteen. So, I mean, I'm in regular touch with the head of retail in HMPPS, and I get the same question, the same reply every time that I ask the question, is that they are selling the products at the retail price, the recommended retail price. And it's just that on the high street, people are selling products at under that price. So it's a difficult one. But I know that it's a very, very common gripe within prisons.
I'm very sorry. Oh, sorry, Yvonne. Yes, you're the last word. People are having to leave, so I just want to make sure that we cover off.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for inviting me. I really do have to leave. I've got another meeting now. But somebody asked a policy question about how can we convince people that this is all good value and a good thing to do? And the answer is, I'm not very hopeful of that at the moment. It is impossible to overestimate the financial pressures that we are seeing on the ground. Governors who want to do stuff can't do it. Education budgets being slashed. I just cannot at the moment see that this is going to be a priority. And I'm sorry that that's a bit of a downer, but that is the truth of what I'm observing.
I think you're right, but I think it's sort of a driver for us to do more work collaboratively across this sector to drive and push change. Agree. So thank you. I just want to thank you so much, Yvonne. Thank you, Himpal, and thank you, Sarah, for all our speakers, for everyone attending. I'm sorry we didn't get through more questions. As I say, we'll be sending out the presentation slides and the recording, and we would like to send out a little feedback form with that. So if you could give us any feedback, that would be great. And if you've got any suggestions for the future series webinars, if you want to download our report and read that, and if there's things that you would like us to cover off in future webinars, please do get in touch. I think we've put in the chat where you can find our newsletter where we will be promoting the next webinars. And if you would like to, if you'd like us to answer questions that haven't been answered, please do put your email in the chat as well. So I'd just like to say thank you again for everyone for attending, and look out for the next webinars. Hopefully it'll be around food growing in prisons. So thank you so much for attending.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Himpal.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Oban.